Well, hello everyone. I'm Jamie Reed, the Education Specialist with the Oracle Applications and Technology Users Group. Really excited to have you join us for today's webinar, Navigating Oracle GRC End of Support Challenges, brought to you by Pathlog. For those who may be new to our community, allow me to share a bit about OA2G. We're a network of Oracle users and consultants dedicated to providing exceptional education and offering support to our members. We're always on the lookout for great volunteers who are eager to make a difference. So if you're interested in getting involved, please reach out to us. Make sure to note Ascend 2025 on your calendars, taking place at the Rose and Shingle Creek Resort in Orlando, Florida, from June 8th to the 11th. Registration is also now open for Database and Technology Week. That starts on Monday, March 10th, and we are excited to welcome you to all of our upcoming events. As we dive into today's webinar, please note that all participants will remain muted to ensure a smooth and uninterrupted experience. However, we encourage you to actively participate by submitting your questions through the questions box at any time. The session is being recorded, and OA2G members will have access to both the recording and the slide deck and our knowledge base within 48 hours. Keep an eye on the chat area for links to our upcoming events, access to the knowledge base, and details on joining OA2G. Now let's warmly welcome our speaker, Thomas Daugherty. Sorry, I know I just mutilated that. Senior Solutions Engineer with Pathlog. Thank you so much for presenting. You can take it away.
Sounds fantastic. Thank you very much for the introduction. Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to virtually meet you all. I am a Senior Solutions Engineer, as stated, with Pathlog. I've been here for a little over a year. And my job is I work as a pre-sales support engineer, and I talk to a lot of great customers like yourself on their journey across various GRC and we'll call it IGA needs within the industry. Today's subject is, in terms of agenda, we're going to obviously be covering the near coming of the Oracle GRC end of life, and what that means to you in terms of how you might approach that subject. What are some of the options that you might want to consider in terms of what you can do to replace the product, and then most importantly, just to give you some insight based on best practices, types of methods within your project. And then obviously we're going to be talking about modernization approach, right? Where we're going to cover what you can do with more modern tools and capabilities, in terms of cloud-based solutions, or, obviously we're going to be talking a little bit about Pathlog today in terms of what we can do for you. In the end, we will have a more information slide that will take you directly to our website where you can understand more about what we offer, in terms of Oracle, both on-prem and within cloud, okay? So to get started in terms of understanding what it means to migrate away from Oracle GRC, we need to really tackle why it matters and what are the next steps that you need to consider as it relates to replacing that GRC function within your organization. So in terms of that, timing is going to be now of the utmost, right? So as you're well aware, May of 2025 is just around the corner. As we enter into spring, we've only got a little bit of time left. So you're going to be in a position where you're not going to be supported by Oracle with that product. So for Oracle eGRC, it's just today and sustaining support. They're only going to fix priority production fixes that are Sev 1s or P2s. Are going to provide updates just for security, but all of that is going to be ending in terms of May. And then the products that are affected by that change is going to be Oracle Enterprise Governance Risk Compliance Manager, which is eGRCM 8.63 or later. We also have Oracle Governance Risk Compliance Intelligence, the GRCI 8 platform. We have, and then this is really in this area of like SODs and process controls and the monitoring that we have around configuration change or the preventative governor. So with Oracle governance risk compliance controls, that is going to impact most of those, especially for our regulated industry, is going to impact a lot of customers that are dependent on those solutions to provide the evidence they need for their auditors. Okay. So in terms of that impact, especially around those companies that have SOX significant controls within their organization, it's going to be extremely important to make sure that they're looking at a replacement very soon for that platform. And in terms of the risk, right, we're looking at these three sort of general areas, right? We're thinking about security risk. So in terms of being on an unsupported legacy software, that means that you won't be able to get security updates. So if there are vulnerabilities, in the platform and the listening ports or in the data transport mechanisms, et cetera, there will no longer be eyes on looking at what it means to get security updates to those customers. And in terms of compliance issues, I mean, we are still regulated, we are still responsible, we still have to provide the necessary evidence to those auditors, right? So whether that's internal, where I have built out, the needs that I have around my controls and how we report on those, or whether it's external auditors that need evidence, that we're properly applying our SOD policies, et cetera. These are functions that will not cease to exist. They're going to continue in terms of requirements. And then in terms of lack and support and maintenance, you just don't want to be on an unsupported platform, right? There's just too much risk of that. And that's also part of the risk that will be evaluated by your auditor, as if you're within a supported platform or not, right? Okay, so let's move a little bit away from that and start digging a little deeper into the planning, for a transition project, right? So we need to consider assessing our replacement options, and we need to execute a successful migration strategy, right? So this is a bit more about the approach, right? Not so much about the software and what it does, but so much more so about what we need to do to consider our change. So in terms of planning this transition project, there's a few things that you need to consider here. We're going to get into some more details. We're going to peel down into the specifics, but we need to, in terms of our access and risk management impacts, we need to really look at that across our entire organization, right? We need to understand how that impacts our IT organization in terms of what they provide around the services of our current GRC platform today, what level of integrations have been done. A lot of customers have done a lot of integration work, a lot of customization work around that platform over the years. We also need to understand from the business, right? What are the things that they are dependent on, right? What sort of controls do they have that help them in terms of assuring that within those areas of business process that we're getting the right level of protection that we expect. So think about the GPO, right? The global process owner in a specific area. And then obviously there's going to be the audit, right? That needs to be considered. So we need to let all these people know what's going on, what changes, that we're considering. And to be successful with these changes, we need to make sure we've got, the right level of people involved, right? So within the leadership, we need to make sure that, all the levels of leadership, right, that exist within the organization that care about compliance and audit, that they are in support of this change. And they need to understand that it's extremely important now to execute this in a timely manner, that we need to get this moving, we need to make decisions, and we need to start thinking about an implementation schedule as soon as possible. So with that transparency is going to be extremely important as you have these conversations and as you dig deep to be able to get your project moving. And then in terms of timeline, it needs to be very clear to everyone engaged, right? What their steps are, what the milestones are, and everybody needs to get aligned to that and make sure we've got clear stakeholders and we've got, in terms of people that are responsible in our diagrams around who's responsible, accountable, et cetera, that we have those clearly established and that they know their role. And then we're going to establish the review, the sign-offs in terms of tolls to make sure that we're successful as we go through the phases of that project, to make sure that the right level of deliverables are in place, et cetera, standard project terminology. All right, so in terms of the first step, in our minds, this is going to be the first thing you need to do, right? So obviously, we're going to look at the current state, of our access and risk management, right? So some of the things that we're going to dig into is how can we, based on modernizing, we're going to get a little bit further into that, how can we expand our capabilities in these areas of access and risk management? But before you can ever consider that, you've got to know your current state, right? So I need to get my head wrapped around, what it is that we do in terms of managing access to our systems, right? How is that happening? Is it, are we doing that through identity automation, or are we receiving ITSM tickets with our, say, help desk application, and that's creating manual, processes, or, people that, need in terms of an action to be applied? Because over time, you may lose sight of those types of activities that are occurring just through muscle memory in the organization. We don't want to lose any visibility to any of that. So we need to ensure that in terms of the project team, that we're thinking about all of those various internal resources, doing the interviews and finding out. And then what about the external resources that we need to bring in, right? So as we execute this project and we're keeping that GRC platform running, which may go beyond May at this point, we need to keep the lights on. So those KTLO resources that might need to, take responsibilities, to keep things running while our existing team members are going to learn the new tool, they're going to take on responsibilities in the project, and they're going to understand what's changing for them and how they're aligned to that. And then also, for contractors that may be executing this because it needs to be timely, how well are they aligned to your goals, right? So you're going to be looking at some more of these modernization strategies, and we need to make sure that those contractors are aligned to, what's going on in the industry, right? They need to know what products are available, they need to know what capabilities they have, and they need to align to that both functionally and technically, right, in terms of delivering for your success. And then in terms of really identifying key functionalities, right, just aligning them in a priority order, right? These are the things that are most important to me, right, in terms of making sure that we meet our regulatory, controls first. Are we looking at sensitive access, or AKA critical access, as opposed to just separation of duty? What's the complexity of our rules, right? A lot of you may remember, it took a long time for a lot of you to develop those rules, right? And you need to think about what went into that and why it's important that a vendor understands that we may need to lift and shift those as a starting point to get you started, and then look at some of the new, we'll call it industry best practice around new rules that are available to help you expand your business, especially around cross-application functionality. We're going to dig into that a little bit more. So with all that, we need to make sure that we get our heads wrapped around everything that we know about our current platform, how it operates, who's involved, and what priority that we want to give around how we would apply a project towards that understanding. And so with that, now next, we're going to really dig into defining our requirements. Okay, so it's important that we start by digging into, okay, well, what's included in terms of what we want to do around what we must have, the way we want to operate. And this is your opportunity to mature or to expand more process or capabilities within your GRC function, right? So we want to make sure that as we look at the landscape within EBS, we want to understand do we have other applications? Because pretty common, we're going to talk more about this in a minute, we're embracing cloud apps as a way to, streamline our integrations. Like we may move some of our procurement functions, we may move, the way that we deal with contracts, et cetera. So as those functionalities expand or we separate our HR platforms, we want to know what the opportunities are around the application landscape, right? So in terms of those requirements, we know GRC is only providing just really that monolithic ERP approach directly to EBS, but there's more applications that we're going to talk about here in a minute that need to be considered. What of the application landscape lives on-premise versus cloud, right? Because it can make a very big difference in the way that you get connected or what the security requirements are within your organization. And there's processes typically you have to invoke, and there's time impact to your project if you don't identify those requirements as part of taking on that mixture of applications, especially as we expand our feature functions within our new GRC capability. And then in terms of identity governance for these target applications, think in the requirements of, okay, hold on, this is our opportunity to fix a lot of things that we weren't real happy about, right? Like manual processes, ticket integration, complexity of how we tie systems together. What can we do to simplify our operational experience? How can we automate more around how we onboard resources, right? So, products in the industry today have good integration, not only just for the governance and risk, but they can bring the IGA function as a converged capability so that we can onboard like joiner, mover, leaver, birthright access. Somebody gets promoted in the organization, you flip somebody to, from contractor to perm. We need automation around all those events, and how well does the system support that, right? So think about those requirements as well. And do you currently have access and risk governance tools in place that are augmenting what you're doing today with your Oracle GRC function? What can we do to consolidate, to think about, well, we don't really want to have a swivel chair approach between all these different systems when we don't need to. If we've got an enterprise grade platform that can provide all of those capabilities, why wouldn't we consider driving down our total cost of ownership, right? We may have to take on a little more project cost, but overall, when we think about lowering our cost to own and operate, this might be a really good opportunity to do that across our EBS and non-EBS. And on the note of EBS, are you in a transition project, right? Are you looking at moving from EBS on-prem as part of this migration to Oracle ERP Cloud? Does your GRC platform give you the ability to migrate at your speed those various operating units in those modules at the pace that you want to do that within your business, right? That's another consideration. And then the other piece is, what about advancing your security, right? I need to include not just SOD and sensitive access, but what about getting an understanding from IT around ITGC controls, right? So digging deep into those, how are we using these applications, right? Are there people logging in off hours? Are there people leveraging workstations not the way we expect them? Do they have loose password policies? So all of those standard general controls that we have within the IT organization, we'd want to think about embracing these various capabilities. And then in terms of, we'll call it more process control, so getting more in transaction control governor, a bit more in config governor. What about being able to expand those use cases, not just to POs and what we're putting on those, do we have the right requisition alignment, et cetera, but what about really digging into the marriage of configuration change, like the bank account information was adjusted and then somebody went out and produced a payment, those sorts of things, after that bank account information was adjusted. So that mixture of privileged access and, standard access, like immediately alarming those types of activities. These are some of the things that I want to define in terms of my requirements, okay? So the next one is really thinking about the vendors in the market. This is, in my mind, this is one of the hardest things that you can do, because you know what, there's a lot of people out here in this space, right? And there's a lot of point solutions where they'll say, hey, I've got you covered around your MFA requirements, and we feel that that's really good enough, and that's going to take care of your compliance needs. Well, we know that's not true. We also know that there's going to be people that say, hey, you know what, I've got a great connector for SAP, but I kind of have a framework for Oracle, right? But you have to develop all your content, AKA controls. Not a great place to be, especially since you've done all the work to sort of get your GRC platform where it's at. You need somebody that can consume that. So we need to make sure when we're looking at these vendors that we're aligning those requirements and the culture of the company, the type of resources that you want to use. We need to make sure they're well aligned with this evaluation process. So you want to do your diligence, right? Run the RFIs, have demos, run the RFPs, get an understanding of the way that these products work, and do your diligence around the proof, the technical proof that this will do, the functional proof that this will do what it needs to do, and that it's cost effective, right? You need it to deliver on time and in budget, okay? All right, so with that, the next thing is the implementation roadmap, right? So we really want to think about, in terms of a comprehensive implementation and mitigation plan, we really want to think about making sure that we have a really well-defined set of deliverables. We need to make sure our test plans are ready. We want to run a bit more agile in our project, right? We want to make sure that if we can do iterative rollout, that's possible, right? So let's start with, remember how we prioritize, the types of controls. Let's get those critical, get EBS up and running, and the most critical priority controls around other integrated applications, but deliver those in phases, right? And then that way you can start realizing value much sooner in terms of your project. So we want to make sure that that plan is going to, in terms of from starting, with what vendor we have selected and their responsibilities and how they align through that organization, that we have all of that structured in terms of making sure that we meet that iterative approach. And then include, in terms of the steps and timelines and resources, just make sure that, everything that's required is laid out well in these plans, because this is a complex problem to solve, right? You've got all those years that you've built out, and you've got an immediate need to get this done and move quick. So you want to make sure that there's nothing missing. Don't rush this step. Make sure that you get this defined, you review it, and you route it around for the right levels of approvals, and be realistic, right? So when you think about testing, it's pretty easy to say we can configure something, we can get it up and running. Those of us that have a technical background, we like to say that's when our job's done, but we know that's not true, because the end users have to accept this, right? It's got to be digestible. We got to make sure that we're realistic in terms of how the testing's done, and that sign off is real. And what's most important with that is we've got to be able to get this into production. So those migration strategies as part of our plan need to be inclusive in this roadmap, okay? All right, so in terms of go live and beyond, this is where the hypercare period becomes super important, right? Make sure to build into your cost and your time the involvement that you need from the resources, which are contractors. Don't cut them short. You've got people that need to be in there to respond quickly to things that go bump, right? We try super hard to get things right, but those of us that have project backgrounds, I mean, I've lived 30 years in the ERP space of delivering PeopleSoft and Oracle EBS and lots of various systems, and I can tell you that if you shortcut this period, it can be painful, right? And so I've been released as a contractor, and I've been brought back in within a week where I need to come in and help them, to be able to support or to extend because they realize that they need to do more with their product. We're going to talk about that here in a moment. So these are all important that we keep we keep a well-established plan, that we make sure that we're building all the right level of training, right? Ensuring that people understand exactly what it is they do in this new product, making sure that the process documents internal, for what do I do when, or how I document a control and give the best practice answers. What do I do around my UARs in terms of them understanding the differences in how I certify? These are all things that need to be established, and that the training should be done early, and that those documents and those resources are made available throughout this period. Okay. All right, so let's move now a bit more into, so that's a bit more project-ish. Let's talk a bit more about this modernization capability, right? So what does it mean to be able to really take this platform to the next level, right? You've been living with what you've got, your constraints are around it, but you understand exactly what it is, right? But when you look at modernization, you're going to bring in new products with lots of new features and functions, and you don't want to be overwhelmed by that. So let's understand that a little better, right? So number one, in terms of some of the shortcomings around Oracle GRC, right? So obviously it's limited functionality, right? So Oracle GRC lacks the advanced features, and you'll see more of that as you do your vendor evaluation for current market, the stuff that I compete with every single day. And you'll definitely understand based on the advanced features what those functionalities are. But in terms of Oracle GRC, it was just a limit, right? It only focused really more in on the SOD problem, right? And this can hinder an organization's ability to effectively manage, governance, risk, and compliance processes, right? So you definitely had, the ability with Transaction Governor, to be able to say, let's go dig a little deeper into process controls. But in terms of how that really expands for the cross-application integration, how that really expands into how we do things better in the cloud, it's just not part of the mechanics of what was built into it. So some examples of that would be the inability to execute a preventative risk analysis as part of a provisioning workflow. So one of the common practices in this converged world of GRC and IGA feature function is the ability to take our rules that we put in place in terms of our detective controls, and leveraging those rules that have got us into a, we'll call it get clean phase, but leveraging those rules that when new access is requested, new birthright occurs, or more importantly, because we're wanting to write clean birthright packages, we have change requests that comes into the environment where somebody wants additional access, or a lot of times companies will give basic birthright access, but the all new access, like to critical ERP functions, would exist through a change request mechanism. We want to run risk analysis, right? We want to leverage our rule sets to be able to say, hey, is that risky access, right? That's not something we can really do here. In terms of lack of robust access certifications, we're talking about the capabilities of bringing in contextual HR data, so their identity data, right? We want to know more about them in the organization, having that merge between the identity data and the account data. And what about peer group? Like, I want to know common, practice in terms of what it means to hand access to an Oracle DBA that runs, an Oracle product. What about usage and risk information, right? So being able to look at the did do analysis of they clicked on, they went into a responsibility, they clicked on a menu, they used a function within that menu, and then that they made change, specific change. They inserted, they made an update, they removed something. So having that visibility as part of our risk dashboard, right? That's not something we have here in terms of this GRC. And in terms of integration challenges, there were limited integration capabilities, right? So it's a bit more, we'll call it legacy style in terms of how we would, do those types of integrations. We have to build out, in the Oracle database, packages, et cetera. So, we didn't really have modern API approach, right? So there's not a bunch of published, we'll call it business objects that I could subscribe into over standard integration models, right? So that's not really something that was there. So with that, when we think about the non-connection to HR and ITSM sources, right, to drive JML processes, if you have it, it's because you built it, right? You hired a bunch of people that wrote code and you're maintaining that code, right? I've talked to those people all the time. I know exactly who they are. And I can tell you that the business doesn't really want to sponsor that anymore. It's too costly to operate and it takes a long time to make those changes. And there's no decentralized view of user access for all enterprise apps. Like going to a dashboard and being able to say, let me slice and dice that information by any way I want to see it, by risk, by process area. So I only want to care about my line of business, by, we'll call it identity, by account, by role, by, specifics of the application as an application owner, where I know what's beneath those responsibilities. I want to pivot up that way. So not having that ability is something that with GRC that's troublesome in my mind. All right, so let's talk about implementing, the traditional application GRC. So as we've discussed, and this is a bit more kind of in the application module area. So when we looked at Oracle GRC from a monolithic ERP perspective, it allowed us to integrate within the confines of the Oracle EBS platform. So with that, we could get great integration with the framework around human capital, order management, et cetera, right, across the business modules. And in terms of functionality, you knew what you had, right? And you worked within that, you implemented, and everything's great, okay? But when it came to looking at other applications from a cross-application risk, you, in that terms of that little red explosion on Oracle EBS, you're able to manage risk, right, within EBS with Oracle GRC, but you certainly can't manage risk in these other applications as you move that functionality out to these connected cloud applications, which again is common practice, across the industry, okay? And so what we're looking to achieve is, well, how can we, as we think about modernization, how can we manage risk in these other line of business applications at that priority level that we discussed in our requirements phase? How can we leverage risk as part of our modernization approach, right? Obviously with Oracle GRC, that's going to be problematic. We're not going to be able to achieve that. And so when we look at converging, when we look at our vendor selection process, the key goal here is to take into account, right, not only our Oracle EBS or our Oracle Cloud, but any of the existing applications that I have today where I have sensitive data, where I have separation of duty requirements at a regulatory, whether internally in my controls, it's just best practice to protect ourselves in terms of, fraud, right? So that being said, we want to make sure that, as we make this decision, that we're going to look at a solution that will integrate with all of these various applications. And then one of the most important things I'm going to describe a little bit later, what kind of content as a starting point will those solutions give me as part of taking on these applications? Does the company have CISAs on staff that are producing content that are based on regulatory requirements, or it's based on best practices from their large customer bases, right? A little plug for Pathlock, I bet. And then on the right, if we look at this chart, what I'm trying to show you in this chart here is that by doing a converged strategy, we're going to increase the value of our GRC tool, right? So by doing this type of integration, we're going to improve the value that we have just out of the box, right? From that lift and shift, take our existing controls and apply them now unilaterally to these various applications, okay? But one of the capabilities that I have now that I've modernized is I can continually improve, right? So I've added a couple more bars over to the right, and you can see time and value is actually starting to improve because I'm able now to do more, right? I can look at more than just SOD. I can look at sensitive access. I can look at did do usage data. I can look at did do change data, where I'm understanding, what are the specific transactions that they're doing, and then producing that marriage between the SOD story and the process control story. Also, as I mentioned earlier with the bank information, being able to really take a look at those configuration changes in the environment and understanding how things occurred, like having that traceability of what caused the concern and having that on a dashboard, including the ability to automate actions against those risks, right? So as I do more with these platforms, we start to see that increase in value and that increase in time, because now we're starting to really build around our tools, and we're starting to, instead of just a flat report that gets sent out for somebody to look at, we're starting to build intelligence into our eventing to be able to say, let's do something automated, and then release those resources to be very focused on business activities, within their line of business, okay? All right, so in terms of the business value, right, let's take a look at just sort of some, we'll call this a little bit of a repeat of some of the things that we're looking at now. But this is that continuous circle in the business for risk and performance, right? So if I start at the upper right in terms of what this means in a mature process, what we're going to get in this maturity is we're going to get sustained compliance, right? We're going to get efficiencies in the way that we operate. We're going to get improved quality of the information, right? So the data is going to be realistic, it's going to be updated on time, and we're going to get a lot of transparency, right? There's no hiding anything, right? It's a fully automated platform that produces evidence, right? That gives the auditor what they need on how access was achieved or why it's off pattern. And then we've got all that automation that we can put in place to be able to deal with, those anomalies that are happening in our areas of risk and controls. And then in terms of company and people, right, it gives us the ability to improve on our strategy and structure, okay? So we can really focus in on those business activities. And then in terms of accountability, you know what, you can't hide anymore, right? In terms of even the privilege work, we're able to do a two-part function in these new modern tools where it's not just checking a credential out of a vault, but somebody is given access to a role in a just-in-time way, right? Think about our zero trust approach, right? Obviously, zero trust is not a product. We're not selling that. What we're selling is zero standing privilege. We're selling the ability to get just-in-time the access in these new tools. And so when they're done with that work, fine, let's look at exactly what they did during that privilege session, right? That's some of the accountability we have around these resources now. And then making sure that in terms of knowledge, skills, and change management, that we've got the right level of tools available, the right level of training available to make sure that people are effective in how they use these tools, and that we've got well-documented change procedures that have gates that say this is appropriate change, and that we're using our own SOD capability to migrate those activities within our GRC platform. And then from a technology point of view, make sure that in that modern approach that it's going to be scalable. One of the things that's great about cloud technologies is that you don't have to go buy in the old days. I mean, I grew up in the 90s, doing technology, and there might be some friends out there listening to me today that did this with me. But scalability was, go buy a bunch of processors, go buy a bunch of disks, buy more servers, and wait for IT to get them deployed. Cross your fingers that that's going to work well. Well, in the cloud world, that really is not a problem anymore, right? If you have a good vendor that's built their technology correctly, that will scale at scale with your needs in terms of how you grow your business, how you expand your business to M&A activities, et cetera, et cetera. That's an important one to consider. And then in terms of enablement costs and data integrity, these are standard RFP type questions, right? You should be asking, right? How well do you do this job? How cost effective are you to own this product, right? And then what do you do to ensure my data is safe, both at transit and at rest, right? These are the types of questions that should be embedded into your RFI and RFP language. And then in terms of process optimization, we need to prove that we're going to give business value back in time. That time and cost is a very important piece of this. Yes, we've got to move, we don't have a choice, but show me efficiencies in these choices that I'm making, right? So if you're not improving my situation, you're not improving the time within my organization, then you might need to continue looking, right? Just don't take the first one that shows up that says yes, okay? All right, so next up is really the importance of a stair-step approach, right? I know Agile is the world we live in, and that's the way we want to operate. But what I'm talking about here is like fundamentally in your program for efficiency within GRC, These are kind of the levels that we can step into with these mature products, right? So obviously, documented policies, making sure that there's good information available, making sure that the framework provides the right understanding of how it aligns to my controls, making sure that we've got the right ownership, the right versioning, and all those components, in terms of how we document our policies are in place. And then ensuring that the automations around risky activity or around getting the right level of access or around how we can request additional access or how we can automate, change of responsibilities throughout the organization. Whatever we can do to automate is going to be time and money, right? So a lot of times, and it's pretty common when I talk to GRC customers, one of the complaints I get on the business side, so for those of you technically listening, is that it takes a long time to get things done, right? It takes a long time for somebody to get new access, et cetera. We need to drive that down. We need to get that down to a very reasonable response time, and modern tools will give you that. And then in terms of application access governance, right, this is really making sure that we're identifying risk and that we're visualizing it and that we're giving different pivots on that data. We need to be able to slice and dice it the way that the customer, meaning your internal auditors, your managers, your users, any of those personas in the organization want to be able to see the risk story. We need to be able to make sure that our tools are capable of providing that. So we need to step up into low friction, ease of use, modern UI, list goes on, okay? And then in terms of continuous controls, this is your process, this is your transaction, this is your change governor. So going beyond just SOD, right? Making sure that we're looking at all of the did-do analysis, right? Not just that they have a violation and that we apply to mitigation or we're remediating the access, but that sometimes, as we well know, that access is required. We can't say no every time, right? And so we need to make sure we're putting governors on top of that to make sure that we're understanding exactly what they're doing, all the way down into understanding those transaction details, that I mentioned earlier about change a bank and produce payment. And is that appropriate? Does it have, in terms of, purchase order, does it have a requisition on it? Things like that. And if it doesn't, what do I do to get the right people involved to put the right controls around that? Okay. All right. And then now I get to move into a little bit of selling. So this is a bit more about PathLock, okay, and what we do. So we've kind of moved out of the, we'll call it definition of your project and what do we mean to get modernized, but this is what we do, right? And obviously I plugged myself a little bit along the way to be able to get to this slide. But PathLock is a platform, and within PathLock, we provide these three key applications, right? So one is going to be the application access governance, and within that application, we have these modules. So we have a very complete access risk analysis that provides SOD, that provides visibility into sensitive access, AKA critical access. We have a very, very good mitigation strategy, so we can do full automation in how we apply those mitigations for things that are recurring or expected, et cetera. So let's wrap that automation around how we apply those mitigations and get the right reviewers involved. We also have a very good remediation engine that can be fully automated as well, right? Where, hey, I've gone through the get clean phase of my project and I've cleaned all this up, but now something showed up. So it's anomalous. Let's slap that down and get rid of it and tell the world that it happened, right? Those are the types of things you would expect from a modern capability. And then compliant provisioning, that is taking those detective controls that we built up in our ARA platform and leveraging those to ensure that access going forward is indeed compliant, making sure that when a new request comes into the organization, and there's a lot where IT, for example, has the ability to write these onboarding rules, right? They can say, this is what it means to join this department and to get access for their day one. And you can build all these discrete rules around what it means to, to give somebody access with all the attributes that you want to digest. That's fine. So attribute-based access controls, role-based access controls, all of that's in our compliant provisioning. But I need Big Brother to keep an eye on it, right? Make mistakes happen, they do. What do I do if somebody comes through to get birthright into, say, Treasury, right? And we've got a fixed set of requirements. Well, if that's not where it needs to be, a rule needs to do something with that. So we can attach workflows and say, get people involved through micro certification, or just, get rid of the access and block it and say no way and tell people about it. And then in terms of UI experience with that compliant provisioning, allowing somebody to come in and say, hey, I need to request additional access. Now, Some of the cool things we do at Pathlock is we also say, if you've got your IGA vendor of choice, okay, like say I've got SailPoint or I've got Microsoft or I've got ServiceNow where I have existing processes already in place, what about extending that coarse grain provisioning process to include a risk assessment, right? A fine-grained risk assessment based on our rule sets to say, does that request meet our compliance requirements? Is it compliant for that request? We can do that. And if you hear my dog barking in the background, I apologize. Somebody's coming to the front door. Please try to ignore it. Certifications, right? This is going to be lots of different certification types. We have user access reviews that are typical, both, we have our periodics where we can schedule it. We can do our, this is a campaign that we're running for a very special circumstance, or that we're doing our get clean around getting this stuff certified by our managers, or we can do role-based where we're rolling this out to the application owners. We can also do risk-based where we're rolling out SOD or sensitive access controls. We're certifying our mitigations, the list goes on, right? We also support what we call a list capability. So think about this one. We don't have any data, right? But we have a list of spreadsheet data that's around, say, key cards, and I want to get the key card access certified. So our campaign module, you can bring any kind of data you want, and you can get that certified within our tool. And now elevated access management, AKA business PAM, right? Not to be confused with like, PAM products out there in the market like CyberArk, et cetera. We're not vaulting. This is where we put elevated application access, into that privileged function and say, we can deploy those roles just in time. So you can come in and request access based on future, based on now, how long do I need it? It routes through for approvals. The access is provisioned, everybody gets notified, you do your work, right? You get done with your work, that access is removed, and then we're gonna give you visibility to exactly what they did during that time, right? And then around role management, especially for Oracle, we have a roadmap item where we're gonna allow you to manage specifically role changes within that application. But what this does for you today is it gives you the risk visibility and all the assignment around that role. And so we can do what if analysis, we've got role splitter, role simulator, so we can do a bunch of work to tell you what you need to do, but then that ends up into an ITSM integration where you need to have a ticket that says go make these changes. But our intent and plan is we've got a really good feature like that on the SAP side of the house that we're bringing into Oracle, and that's actually being worked in our engineering team now. And then continuous control monitoring, it is every much what you expect it to be for transaction control, for TCG, PCG, CCG, right? So it's going to give you all of those. The only thing we do not do in our continuous controls monitoring is we don't live inside of EBS. We will not block and tackle a form. If a D2 form says, hey, he's going to do this, can we stop that transaction from occurring? No, we're going to report on it. We can make changes to their access. And we give you the ability to understand very specifically what happened and get the right people involved. We also can do the license management, right? So that's really important back in that use case we mentioned with Microsoft or others in the compliant provisioning space, et cetera. We have a lot of license integration across various products where license count. And then finally, for cybersecurity application controls, this is where we've got more SAP roadmap where we're doing dynamic access controls, and we're doing more around data masking. We have a lot of features in EBS from some of our legacy products, like say single sign-on or the ability to do masking and non-production. So we do have some products that are making it to our cloud solution, but we have those point solutions available, in some of our previous companies. Okay. All right. So in terms of thinking of all this, as we start summarizing now, around our methodologies across the organization of get clean, stay clean, and optimize. In terms of get clean, we're going to be able to leverage within Pathlock the access risk analysis and our compliant provisioning, and it's going to be our ability to really ensure that our access is appropriate. And then around the stay clean, right, we're going to be able to really leverage in terms of roles in elevated access management, certifications, threat analytics, transport, code, vulnerability. We're going to really help you ensure that the application and the various objects within those applications are going to be consistent. And then on the optimization, as we talked about growing that value, and we added those 2 bars a few minutes ago. Too bad you can't see my hand floating in the air now. We're going to be able to leverage some of those expansive capabilities around monitoring change and what we're doing around dynamic access controls and license. okay? And so that's going to drive our capability up, and it's going to improve our maturity as we implement more of this over time, okay? All right, so then finally, in terms of the summarization of all this, right? So we're going to help you reduce cost of compliance, right? So this is really going to speak to those that need to own and operate this environment, right? So we're going to give you an improvement in your UI experience, and we're going to help the business and audit to accurately report and give them reliable data. We're going to reduce the time that it takes to get things done across all of those contenders we looked at earlier: IT, business, and audit. Okay, we're going to gain a lot of comprehensive controls in terms of our oversight. Now, one of the things I didn't dig into is we provide a lot of controls, or we'll call it rule sets, out of the box, right? So a little over 200 SOD and a little over 220 sensitive access controls for EBS, right? You get those with the connector, and you can use those. You can upload your existing ones you have in GRC today as a lift and shift, right? Just directly through an import. And then in non-production, start taking a look at all of these controls we're going to give you out of the box, right? And that's true of those line of business applications too that we saw earlier when you start looking at those cloud apps, okay? So that's going to help drive down my cost by like a lot. And then we're going to drive a lot of automation in terms of what we do around the tasking of, what if, right? Something happens, how can I automate the action of that going forward, where it happens just automatically through our business process rules. And then the tangible risk reduction, like ensuring that we're driving down risk across all of our frameworks, right? Not just limited to SOX significance or just SOD, but we can get into those other control frameworks like ITGC, or what about GDPR? List goes on, right? Okay, so for next steps, it's pretty important that you understand where to go. So we want to make sure that you understand more about what we do to enhance, not just for Oracle, but within the ecosystem of Oracle. We've got really good coverage, for, well, it's called Fusion here, but it's Oracle ERP Cloud. A lot of people still call it Fusion. There's PeopleSoft. We've got a lot in terms of think about student, right? So in terms of what we have with PeopleSoft, we've got great coverage, JD Edwards and more. And then in terms of automated controls, pretty much all of this, you can go to pathlock.com/technology/Oracle, or just go to pathlock.com, and all of this you can navigate to. But if you look specifically at Oracle, this will give you a deeper dive into what we do specifically around Oracle GRC. And with that, I will now pause. I was going to be done at 1:47, and that's exactly where I'm at. I want to see if there's questions available in the room at this point. If you guys have any of those, let's start taking a look. I don't
see any questions right now. Feel free to post those in the questions box if you do have them. While we're waiting to see if any of those come through, Thomas, I just want to say thank you so much for presenting today, and to Pathlock for your partnership. We really appreciate it here at OATUG. And I know that our members also appreciate all the great education that's provided.
And I do want to add one more I forgot, is the 26th, we have a demo that we're going to provide a bit more about Pathlock. It's a bit more topical. It's going to be very business user focused, but we'll give you a peek-see, if you will, into what we do around this area. But most importantly, as you visit our website, there is a link that you can click on to say, I want a demo. That invokes an SDR. So a sales development rep will contact you, and we'll talk more about your needs, and we'll give you a more custom demo specifically to what you guys need to do based on your timeline and your integrations, et cetera. But looking forward to it. Thank you.
Yeah, and I realized I had forgot to post the links I said I was going to do earlier. So I just put those in the chat now, and there is a link to our calendar of events where you can register for that webinar on the 26th. And we actually have a question that just came through.
Do you have any solution for form rules? And yeah, so we don't live inside of EBS for the form rules, right? We're going to harvest more activities that have occurred. But yeah, as I mentioned earlier, in the PCG side for preventative governor, we don't have a blocking capability within those forms. That is not something that we provide with Pathlock.
All right, well, I don't see anything else coming in. So again, thank you so much for presenting today. If you do think of any questions after the fact, you can reach out to Thomas at Pathlock directly, or you can send those questions to me and I'll make sure that he sees those. So
Awesome.
with that, we will conclude today, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
You too, bye-bye.